Episode 242 of the White Cat Outdoors podcast, bringing you to the table while we talk about the outdoors. This is part 2 of 3 of our informative series that we've been doing. Last week we talked to Tom about property management, and this week it was my topic, and I dove into the senses of deer, specifically their scent, or their nose, their eyes, and their hearing. And basically what I did was did a lot of research to compare their senses to humans because I felt that was the way it would make the most sense to me and you guys as the listener. And I found some pretty interesting stuff that went against a lot of the things I thought I knew about deer. And maybe you guys will too, or maybe you guys already knew this information. But it made me totally rethink a lot of the things I do while hunting or preparing to hunt, and just gave me a lot deeper understanding about how a deer portrays the woods. So I had a lot of fun researching this topic, and I hope you guys get some good information and find this entertaining as well. So on that note, I'm going to quit rambling, and let's get tuned in to this week's episode.
And then I looked dead at his antlers. I got out of the truck, and when I slammed the door, I heard gobbles all around me. Let's see it. Alaska, moose, spot and sock. That is the bucket list. I agree.
White Cat Outdoors. White Cat Outdoors.
Welcome to the table, everybody. Nick was supposed to talk tonight, but I just got news that he was limiting the number of Creed songs being played at his wedding, so
I don't think you can even talk about this because you didn't even see Creed live.
it doesn't matter.
I think that you had the opportunity, a free ticket.
It was not a free ticket.
It was a ticket for free.
Nope,
Essentially.
I don't think so.
If you look at the grand scheme of things, the amount of money that you'll make in a lifetime and what this Creed ticket costs, you're talking less than 0.1%. Probably less than 0.1% what you made this year. So basically free.
And did you guys see Hardy announced that it's not cool to not like Nickelback or not like Creed anymore? So it's official.
Well, it sounds like Nick doesn't like Creed because he's not allowing it at his wedding.
He did say a few songs.
That's not enough, though.
Yeah, well, if we play all Creed, then there's no Nickelback, there's no Three Doors Down, there's no Hardy, there's no Fergie. Like, you have to have a good mix.
Yeah, you do, but if someone requests Creed, you...
And it's in the notes that play it by request, but I don't want the entire thing
All right.
because I want a good array. I just saw Creed live.
And how wild was that party?
It was nuts. I ate a Stromboli from a stranger. I smoked a cigarette from a stranger. It didn't even come out. I didn't even see it come out of the pack. The guy was holding cigarettes.
That's reckless. You don't know what's in that thing.
He had 2 cigarettes in his hand, no pack, nothing. So that was pretty wild. That was a first for me. Like if somebody, hey, can I bum a cigarette from you? And they just have 2 cigarettes in their hand.
It's probably drugs. Turned out to not be drugs, but
Yeah.
dodged a bullet.
So that was
Good
pretty wild.
old-fashioned cig.
And the Stromboli and the cigarette came from different people.
Nice.
I was told I had to shower before I got in bed when I got home because I hugged too many sweaty, shirtless men at this concert. So
Sounds like you had a great time.
it was a blast. Can't complain at all.
No, good time.
Good.
How did you have a good time, Tom?
Yeah, they tell me I did.
So enough of the Creed talk. Last week, Tom gave us some information, some very good information, gave us the rundown on his research topic of deer management. And this week, it's Nick's turn. So you kind of started on one topic and it morphed into another one.
Yeah, so my original idea, and I've seen a lot of buzz lately on tree stand height, and it's been the past couple of years really.
Yeah.
And there's people out there that swear they need to be 30 foot in the tree. And then there's other people that swear that you're not cool unless you're under 10 foot. Like there's like this huge, and then there's guys that are, oh, if you're in a tree stand, you're cheating. And I actually found up until the 1960s or 70s, there were some discrepancies there. In Michigan State, you weren't even allowed to hunt from an elevated position until like the 70s.
Oh yeah. That's wild.
Because that they believed that there was such an advantage to being elevated that it
Was an unfair advantage.
exactly. So that was some of the things I found from doing my research. But to me, if a state went as far as banning elevated hunting, there has to be an advantage to elevation.
There's definitely an advantage here. 95% of the hunting population wouldn't be doing it.
I don't necessarily agree with your reasoning on that, only because 90% of the population probably sprays down with scent-free spray every time.
Yeah, that
Doesn't
do
necessarily mean it's doing anything.
If you're not
But-
spraying down with scent-free spray, you're gonna get winded every time.
You're going to get winded even if you do spray it if you're sitting in the wrong wind.
This is true.
But I understand what you're going for there.
Yeah.
But basically, I spent quite a bit of time researching because I guess the parallel that I was trying to draw is that when you walk through a supermarket, companies will pay extra money to be put on a certain height in the shelves because that's where humans naturally look. And when I tried getting information on it, I found that there really hasn't been any studies showing, a definitive.
Deer walk through the woods with their main focus at this particular height.
Yes, there's opinions all over the place, but I tried to find most of the data I wanted to use was from like a university that's like science based.
Yeah, putting in actual studies, not just somebody sitting in a tree stand going, oh, this is what I saw a few times.
Yeah, exactly. And most of my research came from the University of Georgia, and they have gone as far as putting contact lenses on deer and doing different tests. And so like they've studied it extensively. But what my topic more changed into was information about the way deer see versus humans, because there is some discrepancy, when you talk to people that they can see this, they can see that, they're better at this or they're better at seeing than humans, they're better at hearing than humans, back and forth. So basically what my research came down to was comparing humans to deer and where our strengths are, where their strengths are, and then kind of how we can use that information to benefit us in
as far
hunting.
as tree stand height or literally
Hunting
anything.
in general, yes. So like I said, most of my information came from the University of Georgia. So I just want to start with a couple different things, and we'll just, bebop around as we go through it. First one being their eyesight as compared to humans. So everybody knows that the average human, what they say is good eyesight is 20/20 vision. And basically, if you don't know what that means, it basically means that an object, and I don't know where they came up with this, but basically an object at 20 feet will look 20 feet away. If somebody has 20/40 vision, the average, or something at 20 feet away
Looks 40 feet away.
40 feet away. So yeah, if you have 20/20 vision, that's perfect. If it's 20/40, you see things blurrier at that distance. So with the average human being at 20/20, a deer's average vision is 20/60. So they actually,
Really?
yes, they are a lot.
I've read that if humans had the eyesight that deer have, they would need corrective lenses.
Which,
I did not know that.
Yeah. And this is at daylight time. When you get closer to low light situations, deer do see better than humans.
Yeah, because they have more cones than rods in their eyes.
We're going to get into the cones and rods.
Okay, sorry, didn't mean
Nope,
to get
nope,
ahead.
you're good.
Love
That's
cones and rods.
yeah, that's actually next. Because that was something that was totally new to me. I didn't know the difference between, cones and rods and eyes in the retina. I had never looked that deep into it. So that was something that when I saw that, I was like, oh, this is something totally new. I'm, pretty neat. So basically what Frank's getting at there is that deer actually have 20% more or 20 times more rods than cones in their retinas, which helps them see in low light conditions at dawn to dusk. And then if just give me a second here just to get my notes. So the rods in your retinas are responsible for light absorption in what animals use to see in low light. And cones are responsible for color vision, distinguishing fine details. So because the deer have way more rods than cones, 20 times more, they're way better at seeing in low light conditions. But when it comes to clarity that you get from the rods, they just don't have what humans have. So they basically will see a very generalized image, kind of blurry to our
standard.
Yes. But what happens with those rods, the cones, let's see here in my notes.
Sounds like you needed to get better organized.
Yeah, I did a little bit. But basically with having more of the rods than cones, they are better at detecting like horizontal movement. That was another thing I realized or learned from my research, that deer see horizontal movement better than vertical movement, which I'm not totally sure why.
That's interesting.
So basically like, a tree moving side to side is easier for them to see, or you moving side to side, than something just like falling in front of them.
So if you were to drop your bow out of the tree, it would, obviously they're going to see that. That's an extreme, but it's harder for them to see that than you waving your hand back and forth.
Yes. And so what happens with that part of the vision for deer is that they actually see a lot more in 2D than 3D. And for them to process an image more in a 3D way, they have to see it from multiple angles. So
that's why they walk around.
Well, that's why they walk around. That's why they bob the head bobs. That stuff, like when people are when they're sitting there and a deer's bobbing its head, and you think that they're faking you out.
That's what I always thought.
They're not faking you. They're trying to get different angles of where they saw that movement to create that 3D image of what's going on.
That's interesting. I never would have guessed that.
Yeah.
Because it sure looks like they're faking you out.
Yes. Because I that was my thought all the time. And another thing that I had no idea that deer do, so when they put their head down, they can actually rotate their eyes 50 degrees. Like their eyes can rotate in their socket 50 degrees. So when it's looking down, eating, it can pick its eye without moving its head, is still looking up to 50 degrees higher. So you could do the Pythagorean theorem there to figure out. But just because its head's down,
they can still look up just as high as you are.
Yeah. In general, they're still seeing. Just like when you said, or when you think, oh, they're just trying to trick me going down and popping back up, they see you the entire time. All they're doing is when they put their head down, their eyes will roll up, and you can't even see it. It looks like they're looking at the ground, but they're just getting a different angle, 50-degree different angle at you.
Yeah.
What is their peripheral range?
About 300 degrees.
So really the only time you're not in their line of sight is if they're looking dead away from you?
Yeah, dead away. That was another, so like the average human, 180 degrees is what we see.
Yeah.
And that's peripherals, everything. A deer sees 300 degrees. So like essentially if you look at it like with a circle on the top of their head,
you got to be right between his ears.
Exactly. You have to be between the ears. So like if they're kind of looking off at an angle, you can still get busted. And because they can see that far, even if they appear to be looking away from you, they are probably trying to get a different angle of that to process that image. But what's also crazy, they process images 4 times faster than humans. And that's why they can see movement so much better. Which you think about how fast, like if you look at something, it feels instantaneous.
Yeah.
Think about if you could do that 4 times faster.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you moving, they see it in slow motion in a sense. Like if you take a video that you're watching and slow it down 4 times, it's how slow it is. That's how quickly they can process, like opposite than you. So like if you were to watch a video at 4 times slowed down, they can, like, that same video to them would be in real time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why they're able to pick up that movement so much quicker than humans.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was wildly interesting. Mainly, I think the big thing I learned there was the head bob.
Yeah, that's the most intriguing thing to me, because I always thought that they were just like trying to pretend like they were looking away, but then they jerk back up like, no, I'm still watching. I was just trying to catch that, but they're just making a 3D image. That's very interesting.
I still like to pretend they're trying to.
I'm
fake you out.
gonna pretend they're still.
Yeah, thanks for ruining that for me.
Yeah,
I think you ruined that for a lot of people.
Yeah, because like everybody that I've ever talked to, they talk about how a deer's, tricking you.
Yeah.
The scary part is that if they're doing the head bob, it's because they saw you.
Yeah, you're caught
and
already.
they're looking at you every time they're moving their head around. It's not trying to see where you are; it's processing.
They already have you pinned. They're
Yes.
just making a more complete picture of what they saw.
And that's why it's so apparent not to move again,
Mm-hmm.
because if they see it move once, they're going to sit there and they're going to do their little head bob, and it feels like it's taking forever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I sometimes will just close my eyes because I don't want to move.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're sitting there basically like processing the image. If they're doing the head bob, it's already, they've seen you.
They didn't think they saw something. They saw something.
Yeah. So that's, it's kind of scares you a little bit, where it's like, if they're giving you the head bob, like you got to really button down.
Yeah, and I always do like button down, but I thought that was just like they thought they saw something. Mm-hmm. Like they're like, did I see that? I'm just going to keep an eye on it for a minute. But if they're doing that, they already have you pinned, locked down.
They're trying to create the 3D image because their depth perception just isn't as good as humans because of the cones and rods. So they basically, in an initial glance, see 2D, so they have to get different angles to create a 3D image. So that was pretty, like, whoa.
Yeah.
And another thing, so we've talked a lot about camo patterns and what we wear and does it really matter. So another thing that the University of Georgia has picked up on is concealment is huge. But because they don't see like super clear, and I've used this analogy before, but I was able to strengthen my reasoning after reading this article. So if you take, and we'll use the horizontal movement because they can see that better than vertical, and you take a 50-gallon drum and you put it out there at 50 yards, and you put it on a spinning table, and it's sitting there spinning. How hard is it going to be for you to detect that thing moving?
If it's one solid color?
Yeah, it's just a blue 55-gallon plastic drum. It's sitting on a spinner out at 50 yards, and it's just spinning in a circle. How hard is it going to be for you to tell?
It's about impossible. As the farther it gets away, the harder it is to see. It's got to be really close so you can catch any little nicks or whatever in it to see that it is actually, because you don't have anything to reference movement.
Now cover it in bottomland.
Yeah, now it's no problem.
Or I don't want to single out bottomland. Cover it in Sitka. Cover it in spray painted leaves, ferns. Like cover it in any sort of concealment pattern.
You give it texture, and all of a sudden it's super easy to see.
Now that vertical move or that horizontal movement that it's making is now
way
that much easier to see. So I think, from what I found, movement and what we've all I think agreed on is the key is the movement.
But if you are going to move, you better have a solid color
and do it vertically.
Yeah.
But no, that makes a lot of sense, even as far as the human eye is concerned, and the deer's the same. If there's nothing to reference that horizontal movement with, you can't tell that it's moving, because there is no pattern to say, okay, here's a point in that pattern that is now moved over to here.
Yeah.
If it's one solid color, like if you wear black or all green or whatever earth tone color that you want to pick.
And I think that's why, like, you see the military has gone more towards a digitized camo because it keeps that pattern so small. And humans do see color; they see 3D. So I think for humans, you do need some breakup of the person. But from my research, deer, you don't necessarily need the breakup of the pattern. Obviously, you don't want to get skylit.
Yeah.
But you could be...
You're going to get skylit with any camo pattern.
Exactly, because it becomes a silhouette.
That's not the pattern exactly. It's your silhouette.
Yeah. But back to their eyesight, and like I said, most of this has been daytime talk. But when you get to the twilight zones, like in, dusk and dawn, deer will actually see 18 times better than you can.
You're cooked.
So that is another really scary thing. So like if you're that first light, last light, and you can like barely see that deer, turn the brightness up 18 times.
Yeah, they're looking at you midday.
Yeah. That's where it gets, really sketchy because you think you've got, the cover of night to conceal you.
You don't got shit.
You don't have anything.
So if you spend a little too much time drinking the night before and you're walking in on stand while the sun's coming up, those deer are picking you out from a mile away, watching you walk right up to your tree and climb your ladder.
They can definitely see you a lot further than you think you can see them. So like if you're walking, basically I look at it this way. If you're walking into an open field and you're going to like skirt the edge and the field's 100 yards wide and it like that dusk time, like you can kind of see the outline of a field, but you can't see if anything's in it.
Yeah.
If there's a deer out there, they can almost guaranteed see you because they're seeing literally 18 times better.
Yeah.
Which is, it's tough to quantify that. But it's just absolutely insane.
It is. I do like that all the numbers are compared to human eyesight because that does make it quantifiable because I know what I can see.
If they compared it to a chicken, you really wouldn't understand what the comparison was. You don't know what a chicken.
Because I used to have a bloodhound, and people are like, "Oh, bloodhounds have such an amazing nose," and they're like, "But a grizzly bear's nose is 100 times better than a bloodhound's nose." Well, I don't know how good a bloodhound's nose is compared to my nose because I know what I can smell.
Right. Do you know the comparison of a grizzly bear nose to a human nose?
No. I just
know it's a lot better than a bloodhound?
I know it's 100 times better than a bloodhound is the number I've heard. I've never researched it, but I have heard that.
Did you do any research looking into camo or no?
Not necessarily.
Like, is solid color better than camo?
I didn't find any definitive answer on if like a camo pattern is better or if solid colors are better.
But I would say if you just base it off of their eyesight and use that knowledge to put to camo.
If you look at...
I just wonder if they would be easy. It would be easier to detect your silhouette if you're wearing a solid color.
No, because a silhouette essentially becomes black and white.
Yeah.
I just know if a deer would, I guess see your shape easier if you were wearing a solid color. If your best bet would be to blend in and also not move.
Well, look at if you're like, how far could you read a sign? 60 feet away. Like,
yeah, maybe.
Like
Depends
you have to
on how big the text was.
You have to exactly. So if you look at it in that aspect, if you're walking through the woods and something 60 feet away, look at, I guess, how often do you spot a deer? Like while you're just walking through, do you see him out there 60 feet away, bedded down, not moving? Almost never.
Yeah.
The time you see the deer is when he's leaving.
Jumping.
He's leaving. That's when you notice him. And I guarantee it's farther than 60 feet almost every time.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in a tree, not moving, they're not picking up on non-movement up in a tree. It's when you make that movement where they're locked in, and that could be 100 foot away.
Mm-hmm.
So your best camo is be still.
Absolutely. Yes. Now, when it comes to colors and everything, so I did do some research on like what colors deer see. So when it comes to like the red hues, brown hues, gray hues, green hues, all of those things, basically black and white. The deer have, so
you're saying like when you're wearing a blaze orange suit, doesn't matter.
They do
don't
not see orange
for shit
because that's in like the red hues.
Yeah.
Basically, deer do not have built-in UV filters on their eyes. So like those high vis colors, deer do not see.
So that detergent that gets rid of UV light is hogwash?
According to the
Horseradish?
research I've done, yes, because deer don't have the ability to process UV light. Yeah. But
about
what
that?
deer do see is blue. Now, I know people talk about, I hunt in blue jeans all the time, whatever. Deer 100% see blue, and it actually is 20 times better than a human will see blue.
Really?
So they can really focus in on blue, like big time. The article actually stated, leave the blue jeans at home.
Well, isn't green in the blue spectrum?
According to, like, with UV, I don't know exactly. Their exact...
Well, no, because they say like people are red-green colorblind. So I don't know if red
Yeah,
and
those
green
are like opposite sides of.
Yeah, I don't know how that works.
I don't know how it works either.
But they see blue.
I'd have to look at a color wheel. It's been a while since I had an art
Yeah.
class.
So basically, blues are on shorter wavelengths, which are more abundant at dawn and dusk, which is like the sky and everything. So basically, deer see, I would say, and they didn't give out a percentage, but like 90%-ish, I would say they see in black and white, in grayscale. But blues will pop over everything else.
Okay, greens are on the same half of the color wheel, but they're the top quarter of it.
Gotcha.
So they're the opposite half of blue.
Okay.
So I'm sure they can see some green.
But not as prevalent as blue.
Yeah.
So
But
as Nick
still,
said,
that's
leave the
something
blue
to
jeans at
consider.
home.
You'd be able to see, or they would be able to see green, like if you were wearing green camo as opposed to orange camo. They'll see you better in the green camo.
Yeah. That's interesting.
I'm trying to get to the the research I did on hearing and sight, hearing and scent, because that was all just on sight.
The site is super interesting because you said a lot of things that I wouldn't have guessed.
Yeah. So let's jump away from sight and we're going to get into hearing. So again, the University of Georgia, they actually took bucks and does and put them in the same chambers that they would test humans for like hearing.
Your general hearing test.
Yes. And what was actually pretty interesting is deer do not hear any better than we do. So basically, obviously sound works off of frequencies. The average human can hear from 20 to 20,000 hertz. And a deer's is roughly the same, but the peak of like where your best hearing is between 2,000 and 5,000 hertz. A deer's peak
range.
is 3,000 to 8,000.
So they have a bigger range than we do.
Yes, they have a slightly bigger range, but we hear the same noises. And coincidentally, or not coincidentally, however you want to look at it, the average frequency that humans talk and the noises that deer hear or deer use to communicate fall with very close into the same frequencies. So we hear things
Very similar.
almost exactly the same.
Basically, what you're hearing, they're hearing.
Yeah, exactly.
And if
so
you're not hearing it, they're not hearing it.
yeah, and that's basically what I picked up from it. Like when you talk about like somebody being within earshot of you, a deer is basically got the same earshot distance. So if you've got, how I looked at that is blind calling really can't do that much good for you.
Yes, it can.
Hold on. Now, I've hunted within a couple 100 yards of you before, and I've heard your rattling. I don't hear grunts that far. I think if you're going to be blind calling, from what I've researched on this and then from what I've experienced in the woods, a grunt call is not loud enough to get to a deer that's out of
A couple
ear.
100 yards away.
Yes. Rattling absolutely will.
Which makes sense because most of the deer that I've blind called in came in after a rattle.
Yeah. So I that was one of the things that was kind of like piqued my interest. Like, okay, so if I am going to blind call, I don't think grunting is like grunting or bleeding is really going to be that advantageous.
And that I might use that because I never rattle. Rattling is, I've never once rattled in the woods. I grunt and I bleat, but going off of that, I'm only pulling deer that are basically in my eyesight already.
Yeah.
But
Unless-
like we talked about earlier, how many deer have you walked up on that were 60 feet away that you didn't see until they moved?
Yeah.
So you very well could have a deer inside of 200 yards
That you can't see.
that you just can't
or
see.
You don't see.
Yeah,
And
because it's so thick in some of the places you hunt, you know. So I guess like I'm not saying that you can't grunt
Yeah.
in blind call, but I guess if you're sitting a field edge and you're trying to blind call, I think rattling is going to be your way to go if you're trying
yeah,
to
'cause you're
project.
reaching farther, you're making a
Yeah.
louder sound.
But one thing everybody knows, like there's a million different products out there for sound deadening, tapes and whatnot. And those are actually useful because, like I said, deer can hear a higher frequency, like better, like they're 3,000 to 8,000 where we're at like 2,000 to 5,000. So at that 8,000 frequency, you're talking like metal clinging.
Yeah.
So if you've got like a ladder stand, you know, one of them cheap ladder stands that clinks and clanks every time you climb up it,
Or you shift your feet and it creaks a little
yeah,
bit.
or your cam buckle, you throw it around a tree and it clinks the side of your stick. Those sort of things are like beep, like they can hear that stuff extremely well. And it's not a normal sound, so it's going to pique their interest a lot more than you realize. So using tapes or whatever to deaden your sound is extremely important.
I always thought deer would have heard a lot better because they have such larger ears. They kind of funnel the sound. But
Yeah, but I think more what that's saying is more like what their eardrum is capable of. Their ears are, they're turning it so, like, your ears are facing one direction. You can't move to, like, oh, I thought I heard something there. You turn your head. Like you can watch a deer. They'll hear something. They'll leave one ear forward and turn the other ear around.
yeah.
So they can hear more 360. It'd be like having a headset on. Like anyone that plays video games, if you play like a, Apex Legends or whatever, just to kind of compare it, your headset will move the sound around your ear
So you
depending
can
on
hear
where.
if somebody's coming up behind you, it'll sound
Yeah.
like it's coming up from behind you versus if you just play from the sound off your TV.
Yeah.
Like, how many times have you heard a turkey gobble in the woods and you're like, where did
the
that
hell-
come from?
Yeah.
No, never. Actually, I always know exactly where it comes from, but the problem is the person I'm hunting with also knows exactly where it came from, and they're in two different places.
Yeah.
So we either have
Exactly.
two turkeys or one of us is wrong.
Yeah.
So
So like a deer can direct
If
that
you
sound
make a noise, the deer can pinpoint that noise
Yeah.
a lot better than
Absolutely.
we can.
because of its ears. But
Yeah,
as
we-
far as its eardrum is concerned, it's basically got the same eardrum you do, just a slightly bit better range.
Yeah. So I thought that was pretty interesting because I always just assumed because they have like the bigger ears and stuff that they can just hear so much better. And on a level, like a playing field, they really don't hear any better than humans. So like if you hear it, the deer hears it. You're not making any sounds that like, oh geez, if there's a deer 200 yards away, they're going to hear that unless it's loud enough that you believe a human would hear it too. Because like I said, I've hunted within a couple hundred yards of Tom during archery season, and I'm notorious for not blind calling. I don't ever blind call.
Yeah.
But I can sit in the woods, and I've heard Tom go through his whole sequence, and I know that he does rattling and grunting in his sequence, but I will only pick up the rattling. So what I'm getting at there is if there's a deer at my range 200 yards away or whatever, he's not hearing your grunting either.
So what you're saying is I need to just start hammering the grunt call?
Yeah, I'd
Just
get an
start
amplifier.
wailing on that
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the last sense, obviously, that we're going to go to is scent. It's no surprise that you can't beat a deer's nose.
Yeah, they definitely outperform us. You
yes.
don't got to tell me the statistics on that. I know.
I'm going
they
to
do
tell
it.
them to you anyway. On average, a deer can smell 500 to 1,000 times better than you, which is pretty wild. And what's different about humans and deer is that like humans kind of have like a one-dimensional scent. Like we basically can smell one thing, or like a blend of things. So like if you're making soup and you've got cumin and you've got clove or whatever, like all these different pepper, salt, it smells like soup to you.
Yeah.
If you take a shit in a bathroom and you spray some Febreze, it smells like shitty Febreze. Like a deer can pick up to 6 different scents at the same time.
So they could smell the salt, the pepper, the cumin,
Yeah, individually.
Mm-hmm.
So spraying yourself with like scent covers and stuff, we'll get into it. There is some that are effective.
Okay.
But,
I would have guessed there are none that are effective.
but what I'm getting at is like if you put doe piss on your boots and walk through, they're going to smell the doe piss. They're going to smell your rubber boot. They're going to smell the bacteria coming off of your skin. Like they're going to smell each of those things individually. Like the doe piss is not going to mask everything
Any other
else.
scent.
They're going to just pick them up individually. And they, according to the university, this was actually the Mississippi State University. They've come up with that they have 6. They can smell 6 things at one time, which is hard for you to even fathom.
Yeah.
Like,
So you need to cover yourself with 6 different types of doe piss.
absolutely, that's precisely.
Better
what,
go with 7 just to be safe.
And they actually, through their research, and this was absolutely insane. But so I'm going to go through a few things, but then hit the main point at the end. But 60 to 70% humidity in that like 50 to 60 degree weather is the absolute peak element for them to smell you.
So like rut
Yeah.
is when they can smell the best.
Like if you get those cold Novembers, it's even better. But like if you think about like lately in Pennsylvania, late October, you're sitting 40, 50, 60 degree weather.
That's their wheelhouse for smelling.
It is the best time for them to smell you. Absolute best time. And in those conditions, they found that a deer can pick up your smell at up to a half a mile away.
Wow.
So
I've always heard like 400 yards, but
they found in Mississippi State half a mile that they can pick up your scent.
wow.
So that's not like if you're sitting in a tree and you like the wind's going, you could be set up perfect, but a deer a half a mile away behind you.
If your scent's blowing that direction and gets there.
That's what
half a-
I've always said. Just because you didn't hear the deer snort doesn't mean you didn't get winded.
Yeah.
I feel like most of the deer that wind me from hundreds of yards away and don't make a noise. They just go, yeah, I'm not going to head over there.
Yeah, they put their nose up and go, not today.
I'm just going to
Turn
stay
the other
over
way.
here.
That is interesting to know that their peak smelling range as far as temperature and humidity is right when we are most likely to be hunting them. And it's also because it's their rut. I'm sure that has something to do with it as far as...
It piques their senses. Like,
Yeah, because they need to be able to smell a doe, to go breed. So it makes sense that that's when those are the conditions that their scent works the best.
so it's going to be tough for me to like bullet point this. So I do want to just read this little excerpt. And this is about the sprays. And then we can discuss it after. Like, just hear it verbatim. And then we'll discuss.
Make sure you cite your source.
This is Mississippi State University, which if you dive into like anything about deer and wildlife, like Mississippi State
They
is,
are the forefront of
Yes.
deer research.
So this is an excerpt from their research. Human scent is a complex mixture of hundreds of compounds given off by bacteria that live in our bodies and our skin. Scent compounds also come from the human body itself when it breaks down molecules to make energy. So as you burn calories, you're literally creating scent, which you're burning calories
Walking
all
in
the
the
time.
woods,
Sitting
there
there.
getting warm.
Yes. The odors emitted through the skin, or the odors are emitted through your skin and breath. These substances, the VOCs, evaporate into the air and can spook deer while you're hunting. Figuring out which specific ingredients of your body odor spook deer is a challenge. The MSU researchers said each of us emits a unique scent, that the scent varies depending on what and when we eat, drink, exercise, and sweat. To get a cross-section of scents, the researchers collected body odor samples from 65 people who for hours wore either an untreated t-shirt or a treated t-shirt with a spray designed to eliminate or mask a human body's odor. The researchers tested 4 scent-eliminating sprays of dozens on the market, though they did not identify which specific brands they used. Based on the analysis of hundreds of VOCs emitted by the 65 people, researchers found that the sprays worked by greatly reducing the levels of 29 29 key compounds, either by killing the bacteria, binding to the chemicals, or converting them into a less volatile compound. So basically, the biggest thing that I picked up from that was being clean is your best scent prevention. Because
if you have sweat and other things on your skin.
Wait, so how many different scents do humans?
29.
No, I thought the spray eliminated 29
No.
Yeah, I thought you said
That's
there's
what you said.
hundreds of compounds.
emitted by humans.
Let's see here.
But I suppose if they're pinpointing 29, those are probably like the most quote-unquote volatile
Oh,
ones.
yeah. Human scent is a complex mixture of hundreds of compounds given off by bacteria that live on the body and our skin. And then
So basically,
researchers found that sprays work greatly by reducing the levels of 29 of the key compounds, either by killing the bacteria, binding to the chemicals, or converting them into less volatile compounds.
So those 29 are probably the most
yeah.
prevalent, the easiest
but
to
that still
leaves hundreds.
leaves hundreds
Yes.
that the deer still can smell.
Yeah. And I think getting any advantage on the game that you're hunting is important.
Yeah.
And I
It's
know
still
that,
an advantage, even if
Yes.
it's a small one.
like, put it this way, like if there's 29 out of hundreds, let's just call it 5%. If you're playing blackjack or playing roulette where you have a roughly 50-50 shot, if you could gain a 5% advantage, why
huge.
wouldn't you do that?
Yeah.
Like if you can tip the scale 5%, maybe it's worth it, for what it takes. So I guess, like I said, what I learned and what I took away from the scent thing is that it's not necessarily, you're not going to trick their nose. You never will. I think that's a pretty general. There's maybe one person that I can think of that believes that you can trick a deer's nose. But at the end of the day, they're going to
You're not.
smell you.
Yeah.
But I think what you can do to help yourself is be clean, don't sweat so much, and maybe, and I'm guilty of this, but like eating foods that are going to make you profusely sweat the next day, like wing night at French Creek.
Yeah. That's. And let's be honest, we're not going to stop.
I will
doing
never
that.
change.
No, so
I'm
like
not going to stop eating way too much garlic on everything I cook.
yeah, but it's interesting because I was a firm believer for a long time that those sprays do absolutely nothing.
Yeah,
But
me too.
through that research they did with 65 people, there was a significant
Did they
increase.
say what sprays or
No,
what?
they wanted, because they're all essentially, if you look at them, they're mostly the same exact compound in like it's all the same formula. They didn't go into brand specifics, but they took 4 of the top brands. So if you walk through your store,
those.
yeah, and used those, and there was a noticeable difference from the people that didn't treat themselves.
I would have thought that was 100% bullshit.
I would have too. But what I picked up from that too, like if you're talking with sweating and all of that stuff, if you spray that stuff on at the cabin and then you go walk 300-400 yards, hang a stand,
Doing nothing.
it's doing nothing. Now, to me, it's like, okay, maybe get up in your stand and spray down. Maybe that will have more effect. But I know for a long time when we were younger, it was like ritual to spray each other down with that spray before you walked out of the cabin. It was just like kind of prepared you like, hey, we're going hunting. Let me spray you down and you're, now you're scent proof.
Yeah. But all of your scent is now coming out after that. And
Yeah. I know guys that will wipe down, or like not, I don't know them personally, but I've read articles from successful hunters that will avoid foul foods like onions and garlic through hunting season, and they will bring wipes, scent-free wipes, and will wipe down periodically throughout the day if they're sweating to remove those sort of things. Like,
it sounds like that would be your best way of masking your scent, is to do something like that rather
Yeah.
than
But-
spraying yourself down. But
again, at the end of the day, if the wind, I don't care what you're doing, if the wind's not in your favor,
you're done.
it's not going to help you.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it could be the difference of a deer busting you at half a mile versus
Yeah, well, and that's just,
150 yards.
and that's where it gets back to like, okay, maybe it's a 5% advantage.
But
could
do
be
you
worth-
want the 5%? The
Yeah.
5% might get you that
Yeah,
big buck.
exactly. It might just ease him just enough to get him into bow
To
range.
take 2 more steps.
Yeah. So I guess I'll leave
Yeah,
the
I mean,
listeners
if-
with that.
He's about to step in your scent cone, and that,
And you narrowed it just a tiny bit.
yeah.
It's one of them things to think about where
Mhm.
a lot of the stuff I researched really, and I have a lot of respect for MSU
Me
and
too.
the stuff that they produce.
I read their articles all the time.
So for me, like there was a lot of things that I going into this episode thought were BS, like
Yeah,
about
had
scent
hard
control,
opinions
about eyesight, hearing, and after reading their research, I have learned to look at things a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a lot of interesting stuff out there that I had never taken the time to really dive into.
Mm-hmm.
And I encourage anybody that's interested in deer wildlife and how deer are, and they're like really get into the scientific side of them, to coast through MSU's reports and
And they do a
articles.
lot of different stuff having to do with deer. You know, they look at bedding areas, how deer travel a lot. You know, the scent,
Yeah,
eyesight,
they've
all
taken.
that.
Yeah, they've put
They collar deer.
collar deer all the time. And they were literally making contact lenses for deer to like see what they could do to affect their eyesight and see different things or whatever, like to try and get an idea of where they're at based on like I feel like they use humans as the baseline for senses.
Yeah.
Which is I think a really good place to start because that's what we are.
It's what we understand.
Yeah. So I thought it was pretty informative. And I learned quite a bit, and it's going to make me think a little bit different, especially going back to the head bob thing. That was like a crusher. For
Yeah,
me.
I'm really upset that you ruined that. I hope some people leave it in the comments that you ruined their day on that one.
Yeah, because there's no more like, oh, I think if I just stay still, she won't see me. Like, no, she's already seen you.
She saw you. She knows you're there.
Now you can, if you don't move again,
You can put her mind at
you
ease
can put her
again.
mind at ease. But
She knows you're there.
she already knows you're there.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's about all I got on deer senses, and I actually kind of enjoyed the way it went instead of just going to tree stand height.
Yeah, it does kind of suck when you go to research a topic and it just does nothing but solidify all of your beliefs that you previously had going into it. So the fact that you found some stuff that was like, fuck.
It
I
basically
guess
got me
I don't
to
know what I'm talking about
it
on some
basically
things.
got me to a point when it came to tree stand height that it doesn't really matter.
Well, that's same thing happened to me last week with my research.
Mm-hmm.
Like I went in thinking I was researching doe management. Turns out it's not
Turned
nearly
into
as
property
important.
management
Yeah.
right away.
Yeah, and I went in thinking that I was going to find somewhere around 15 foot is going to be the like the optimum place to be, and there's any research I found really has nothing to do with your tree stand height. It goes into basically movement is the biggest thing and not being detected.
Sounds like it doesn't, with them being able to pivot their eyes 50 degrees, it doesn't matter if you're 30 feet up in that tree. If you move, they're going to see you.
I mean, if you think about it, like if you don't have a hat on or anything, stare straight forward and see how far you can look
Yeah,
up.
you can for sure see more than 30 degrees up.
But I don't think 50.
Yeah.
I don't think you're seeing 50 degrees up. Like
No.
a deer can see a much wider range
Yeah.
than you can, and they can pick up movement so much better, 4 times better than you can.
Yeah.
That was eye-opening, literally, for me.
Yeah, for sure.
So I hope you guys enjoyed the second part of this series.
I really enjoyed
It's-
this episode. I'm glad that it turned into what it did with
Yeah.
where your research went.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised, and I learned a ton. And I know that this isn't really the way our podcast typically goes, but I'm hoping that this is maybe something a little refreshing for the listeners. You know, as we get geared into deer season, I think it's good to go over some more informative episodes. And you know, we're not sitting here talking gospel. You know, we're basically, I'm putting the research out there. This is what I found in my research. Take with it what you will. But I promise you the people that wrote these articles have spent decades researching this sort of thing. And it goes a lot deeper than just time sitting in a tree stand. These guys study deer 24/7, 365
Yeah.
in controlled environments, in the wild, and everything in between. It's pretty remarkable, the amount of information that's out there on this stuff if you're willing to dig for it.
Mm-hmm.
And if it interests you. And I think if you spend the amount of time we do in the woods,
It should interest you.
it's not deer. And I try to explain this to people that don't understand our obsession with hunting. I try to tell people it goes so much deeper than October and November hunt. Like my obsession with deer goes so much deeper into like way more than just sitting in a tree between October and November.
Yeah.
And if you're like that those sort of articles should interest you, and you can learn a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
So, like again, that's part 2 of 3. Next week we'll have Frank talking a little bit about ballistics, and who knows, maybe his is going to go a different route too.
Yeah,
2 out of 3 have gone a different route.
I think I like where it's going though, because Tom was like getting deer around. You're like, okay, here's how you can fool
deer's
the deer,
here.
and now I'm going to show you how to kill it
Yeah.
and
So-
what gun to best do it with.
Absolutely. Do you plan on getting into archery at all? Like,
No,
with-
I was specifically going to look at rifles because I'll just kind of spill the beans here. I am a big 308 guy, love 308s. Tom likes his 6.5 Creedmoor, and 6.5s are like a really big topic now. People
and I'm
love
a 7
their,
MMO8 guy.
Yeah, people love their cartridges. And a lot of people like talking shit on other cartridges, and I don't know.
We would never.
I've seen so many deer get wounded with this cartridge, so I'm just going to kind of break it down, look at the numbers, and see who performs where and how good.
Awesome. Well, hopefully all these listeners enjoyed the last 2, and they're going to stick
I'll
around
say
for the
right
third.
now that I'm a 6.5 shit talker, so I'm hoping to.
Solidify.
You guys
that.
have found some stuff that has just flipped your mind, so I'm really hoping to not flip my mind on the 6.5.
I don't know.
I think you will.
the 6.5.
honestly.
The proof's in the pudding.
Yeah, we'll see.
So I guess on that note, you guys know what to do. Get outside.